State and are excited to hear your work with food security and what the role of leadership may look like as we play into that. So I'm going to mute ourselves and let you go for it.
Right on. Okay. Well, hey, man, welcome to Kansas State, everybody. I tell you, just as a way to get going, uh-oh, did I lose you there? Oh, we're back. Okay. Hey, man, can you hear me? Wave if you can hear me. Oh, right on. Okay, good. Well, hey, man, remember when you were kids and college seemed like a billion years? Remember the first day of third grade, and it was like, oh, man, an entire year of third grade and then fourth, fifth, sixth. It just seemed like an eternity away year, but there you are, man. So it's just interesting. Sometimes it seems like you'll never get someplace or it seems so far off or you'll never be that person. And then suddenly you are. So, hey, man, welcome to college. And I hope you all are having a good old time of it. I did not go to college. When I was a young man, I discovered the world of nightclubs as a very, very young man. And I wanted to open the greatest nightclub in the world. And that's all I did. I worked in nightclubs, literally before I got out of high school because I was really interested in the power of music. Just so you know, man, we're different generations. But I think like many of you all, I was coming up, I really wanted to be part of making the world a better place, and I was just looking for my way. Now, I chose music because I watched my parents' generation who, were caught up in Vietnam and a lot of the real rough road that America was on back then. And not unlike today, many of them struggled with the sense of, what would bring us together. And they were divided politically and socially just as much as we are today. But I tell you, man, you put on the right kind of music. Man, my parents loved Motown. And you put on Motown and people who didn't agree politically would dance. And that really interested me as a young man because I started to become intrigued by this idea of how can you get people who don't see common ground, people who don't think they get along or they don't believe the same things. How can you get them to a place where it might open up? And, for me, I really discovered this idea of maybe it's a place where they play music. Or maybe it's comedy or dance. But you get my point, man. That's what I wanted to do. Now, long story short, like some of you all, I was a volunteer. I didn't have any real big burning interest to go out and feed the homeless. Like many people, you all grew up with it. But, when I was a kid, man, homelessness really started appearing on a scale that was pretty new in America. I mean, there's always people on the outside, people who were on the fringe. But to see people sleeping, in front of the White House or behind the Capitol, all over Washington, D.C., man, in growing numbers, and not just men, but women and sometimes families. It was really, really new and disconcerting, man. So like many people, I certainly felt bad, but I didn't know what I could do about it. Again, I ran nightclubs, but I ended up going out to volunteer one night. And I know you all had to do service just to make sure everybody's paying attention. So how many of you all did service when you were in high school? Raise your hands. It's just what my generation doesn't get, man. When my generation talks, when somebody my age talks to you about being generation next, it's like, man, you're generation now. Man, you all have paid your dues. You've done a lot more service than I ever did. And think about it. You're the biggest, most diverse, most electronically connected, most educated generation in the history of the world. And you've been raised doing service, and that's a big doorway. It took me into my late 20s before I really did any kind of service. But long story short, I went out one night and volunteered to serve the poor in the nation's capital. And I went out in this truck and I was just bouncing along, asking questions, trying not to reveal how nervous I was. Because like everybody, I was a little bit burdened by the stereotype of who I would encounter. What were homeless people really like? I mean, I'd seen people from a distance and I tried to be empathetic, and let people know I cared, but I never really got uptight and close. So I was nervous, right? So I started asking questions, and the first thing I asked was where the food came from. And it was interesting because they were buying the food at one of the most expensive stores in Washington, D.C. Now, this is germane for many of you all because many of you all have, and you are now, or you will take classes that you, for the life of you, can understand why they make you take that class. I will never use this ever in a billion years. I will never use this knowledge. This is absurd. Why do I have to learn about the Pythagorean theorem or whatever? And for me in nightclubs, because I studied nightclubs the way you all are studying Now, this was what I chose to do. This was my what I was majoring in. But one thing I had to do was inventory control, and it was a laborious, really heinous exercise. I hated doing it, but it had revealed to me that the restaurant I worked in threw away food every night. And I knew that a lot of other restaurants, it was part of the economics of food service in America. The price you pay for a hamburger covers the cost of a certain amount of hamburgers that never get sold, right? So I'm thinking, wow, here's a piece of knowledge that I resisted, that I hated getting, but I see a doorway here, because they're buying food every night when the restaurants and the hotels and the caterers and all the places that are around DC, they're throwing away food. But then more importantly, we pulled up that night in front of the State Department, right down the hill from George Washington University. And here was this long line of men and women standing outside in the rain, waiting for this truck to pull up. And I just kept looking at this, and the door slid open, and a lot of my prejudices and fears rapidly, kind of disintegrated, because I was having these amazing conversations with people. But believe me, man, I didn't look in the eyes of a homeless person. My life was changed. I took the knowledge that I had learned, again, however reluctantly, and just came back a couple of weeks later with a little business plan. As a volunteer, man, all I wanted to do was help. But I came back with this business plan saying, hey, FedEx, which you all have grown up with, but was pretty new when I was young, man, if you could create a FedEx for food, and the restaurants, the hotels, the caterers, the universities, the hospitals, the farmers, people who hate throwing away food, if they could find a safe way to donate that food, and you could collect it at one spot, man, you could feed a whole lot more people a whole lot better food for a whole lot less money. But I really pushed it even further, because again, man, I didn't want to just see people fed. The whole idea of opening a nightclub and everything I wanted to do in my life was about some kind of substantive change. So I proposed this idea of a cooking school for homeless men and women. Imagine bringing in people out of the rain. The night I served, if I didn't say it already, was a rainy night. Here were these people standing out in the rain, for all intents and purposes. And, this is kind of a hard thing to say out loud, but what I witnessed that night was what I came to learn was really, kind of charity in America. And no disrespect, it's historic, it's time honored, but it was more about my redemption, the redemption of the giver versus the liberation of the receiver. And I just felt that I wanted to turn that around. So again, this idea of a FedEx for food, I added on this idea of a cooking school, offering men and women a chance to come in out of the rain and be part of the solution, instead of being viewed as part of the problem. And it seems obvious now, but it was kind of radical back then. And it was funny because, as many of you all will in your journey, I guarantee you will go with a new idea. You will have a vision, and you'll go to a group of people and you will have thought it through, and you have a case to make, and you present your ideas, and you assume that suddenly people will say, wow, man, thanks. What a great idea, and that's kind of what I thought. I thought it would be a great idea that these groups would take and run with. But I was shocked at how hard, and as you will be sometime in your lives, I guarantee, you'll be shocked at how reluctant people are to embrace new ideas. Things that you've thought through, you've done the business, you know how to run, you've done the budget, you've really got answers to a lot of different questions you think they'll ask, but they still say no. And that's where I was. And I was, again, like you all, and I hope part of our conversation today, if I can plant any one of a few seeds, the first will be that idea that sometimes, man, you got to decide if you're going to do it or just let it go. Believe me, young brothers and sisters, the road sometimes splits, and it doesn't have a signpost that says, happiness, polka dots and moonbeams this way, and I'd turn back if I were you that way. Life doesn't do that. Sometimes you just got to really, you look and you're like, man, I don't know which way to go. And in my situation, I had been raised, man, I spent 10 years working in nightclubs to build up enough of a reputation and a network and business skills so that I could open what I wanted to do and make the greatest nightclub in the world. But suddenly, man, this road split, and I had this idea that I thought was so simple and so needed. This idea of what I called the DC Central Kitchen. But every time I tried to make a pitch to any group, I was just rebuffed, man. I was told all the reasons it wouldn't work, and I was so shocked and dismayed that people could be so addicted to routine, so unwilling to see even remotely the concept I was proposing. Man, any of you all worked in a restaurant? Anybody worked in a restaurant? Raise your hands if you worked in a restaurant. You know what's funny, man? You know what I heard over and over again from people? oh man, Robert, man, we know you mean well. You're a nice young guy, but man, you're really naive to think restaurants would hire men and women who were drug addicts or homeless. And it's like, you've never worked in a restaurant, man. Anybody can get a job in a restaurant, man. It's the island of misfit toys, but that's how much resistance I had to put up, I was going up against. So I had to make a decision, and I decided I would open the DC Central Kitchen and make this thing, at least get it going. But here we sit almost 28 years later. And I've been doing this now, and it really became my nightclub. I discovered that music and food have a lot in common. But to really kind of, get into this today, there's three kinds of leaders, and you can decide which one you want to be. I already know which one because, only the best, only the elite end up in Manhattan, Kansas, the Little Apple. So I already know what kind of leaders you're going to be. But I always say, man, there's three kinds of people, man. There's people who have their head down, and that's cool. I get it. I just got to do my business. I got to make payroll. I got to get things done. I get it. The second kind are people like you all just today, man. You get a chance to hear some hunga-munga come in and talk big stuff. They talk a little bit about the future, and of that second group, most people put their head back down and go about what they were doing, but some people hear about that and they think, man, that future sounds compelling. And I think, I want to be involved in that. But the majority of the second group, man, they just sit and wait for the future to come to them. Man, I don't know about you all, but I always aspired to be part of a third kind of leader. And that's the person who says, no, man, I'm going to march out and meet the future. I can't wait for that to happen. I can't let something bad happen if something I do today, even as remote as it might sound that I could make a difference, I don't care. I refuse to allow something bad to happen if I can maybe do something about it today. And in my situation, when you're in my business, I had to get real serious really fast. I just couldn't hope that people called up and gave me food to feed people. I couldn't hope that people had jobs. I had to go out and make jobs happen. In 1996, I started working with a lot of men who were coming home from prison. And there were no jobs back then if you had a felony conviction. So we started our own businesses. I could have complained bitterly and said, oh man, those companies are all messed up. They should see the beauty as I do with people and give them a chance. But I get it, man. I understood that there was a chance that I could work with those companies and get them to see the light, but it might be easier if I showed them the path. So I started hiring people. When I left DC 2 years ago to move to Los Angeles, the DC Central Kitchen had about 140 people on the payroll. The majority of were men and women home from prison. We were doing school food, scratch cooked meals for 7,000 kids every day, employing men and women 13 an hour with full benefits to get started in our business. But I always look out and try to see the future coming. And I knew in my business, a lot of it was going to have to do with men and women coming home from prison, an aging society. At the end of the day, man, the food that food banks, pantries, and I know you're all involved in hunger and you're talking about doing some direct action there, but all the food that we give away in America, for the most part, that food is lost profit. An industry bought it. They couldn't do anything with it. No one would buy it, so they donated to charity. And man, you can't plan for the future based on that. So one of the things I started doing is realizing that farmers, any of you all come from a farming family or a farming community? Every single day in America, we throw away about 40% of the food we produce. 40%. Half of that is fruits and vegetables that can't be sold because they're cosmetically imperfect. So I used to sit by and wait for the phone to ring and hope somebody call up and donate it. But we started doing in 1997, we started going out and asking farmers if we could buy it from them. And it turned out to be a radical and revolutionary piece of business because as soon as we bought it, we could turn around and again and sell it. We could open our own companies and do catering or school food, as I suggested. So by relocating to Los Angeles, man, I put myself right at the back door of the greatest food system, the planet's ever seen, man, the Inland Empire of California, the biggest producer of fruits and vegetables ever, anywhere. But I'm also here because every single morning, man, and this is really germane to you and your generation, every single morning, 10,000 people wake up and they're 69 years old. And that's going to go on for 18 years, every single day. Man, I know some of you all probably wish that me and the rest of the baby boomers, someday we just vanish, man. All that would be left was our clothes sitting on the ground in the middle of the street. But I'll tell you, we're not going anywhere. Short of an asteroid hitting the earth, man, the boomers are here for a while. We got to figure out a way to work together on this. But I'm really hyper aware of the number of older people in America who are going to be old and poor and just don't have enough money for the extra 10 years in the bank that science is going to give them. So I came out specifically to kind of be part of a revolution. What does a senior meal in the future look like? Now get this, man, in Los Angeles, there's almost 1.25 million people over 65, and about probably 35% rely exclusively on Social Security. That number is going to double in 10 years, the number of older people in California. And that is a profound thing. But you also have a generation of people who are going to be most likely pretty interested in healthier food. If you don't mind, again, man, show of hands, how many of you all are interested in healthy local food? How many of you all, just question, man, no judgment, how many of you all are vegetarian or vegan? Man, we got to work on you out in Kansas, man. I tell you, you're obviously a beef-eating lot. But I'll tell you what, in the meantime, I'm just predicting that between a generation of people who were raised watching the Food Channel and who are really hip to food, I think you're going to see very soon a generation of older people who are going to be wildly health conscious. So I came out here to create a super business. Our goal is to say, look, every year Los Angeles has senior meal contracts that are worth about $12 million, and there's only one company that applies for the contract to feed seniors. And they're not bad. I have nothing against a big company whatsoever, but their model is they serve processed meals and the profit leaves Los Angeles and never comes back. And so I'm offering an alternative. I'm coming in and say to the city, it's like, hey, I'll tell you what, man, I want that money. And here's what we'll do. If you give the LA Kitchen that contract to do senior meals, I'll buy food from local farmers. I'll put $7 million in the pockets of local farmers over the first 5 years. And I'll keep people out of prison. And I'll create $35 million in new wages for people who go through our job training program and get jobs in the community or work for our social enterprise business. I'll create a healthier meal for less money. And more to the point, no profit will ever leave Los Angeles. I'll invest it over and over and over again. But again, man, the reason I bring this up and what we're going to get into is just a conversation about how do you make impact in your life, man. I'm one guy, and I was just a volunteer who tried to make a difference. Just somebody who offered an idea up. And of course, I was rebuffed, and I started a kitchen. But I don't want any of you all to think that you have to go out and start a brand new big business to make change. When I was young, again, man, I know it's ancient history, but a man who really greatly influenced me was a gentleman who ran for the President of the United States in 1968, Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy's younger brother. And again, it isn't about a Republican or Democrat at all. It's just he was a young man who spoke to me when I was a young man. And I just was really taken with what he was trying to do and what he was trying to accomplish. But he was assassinated right before I turned 10 years old. And it was a real pivotal moment in my life. When we moved to Washington, D.C., I went to visit his grave. And there was a little teeny, small gravestone, but across was a marker that just quoted from a speech he made in South Africa where he said, in effect, every time somebody stands out against injustice or tries to make somebody's road a little less weary, they send forth a small ripple of hope. And that's what I do every day, man. I practice a thing I call relentless incrementalism. Small steps every day. Sometimes you look at the cumulative effect of anybody who spent a long time doing business. Like I said, man, I've been doing this 25 years. And I'm real proud of the work I've done, man. We've created in D.C. over 30 million meals. 1,700 people have gone through the job training program and gone on to get work. We're a self-sustaining nonprofit. 60 cities have done something like it, including a great kitchen, Faith and Holy Trinity in Kansas City. There's about 45 campus kitchens, which if you're interested, I urge you to look up the Campus Kitchen Project, which is a student-led hunger relief thing I started, again, in the early 2000s, where students use the cafeterias in your universities or middle schools or community colleges in off hours, and there's 45 of them. But I tell you, man, it's not because on one magic day it all happened. It was relentless work. I mean, I just got up every morning and said, I don't want to just get up and walk around and kind of be a zombie, man. I want to make something happen. But sometimes it was just small, random things, man. It was just being nice to someone. It was giving somebody who frankly had tried 3 or 4 times to get themselves thrown out of the program one more time. And that one more time is the time that stuck. It was just taking food that I knew we didn't really need, but I knew that restaurateur really wanted to make a difference. So we took it so that person would feel like, man, I want to do this again. I can't help but really try and suggest that, you have a powerful tool and it's your own life, you know. And I urge you as we go forward, and we'll open up the questions and everything. But I'll tell you, man, you know, I think for many of you all, this is a real critical time, man. You're, you know, this is something you've been waiting for all your life. You know, you're independent now. You're out on your own, you know. Mom and dad are a couple of miles away or a couple hundred miles away, you know, and you're out there making a decision about the way you want to live your life and the person you want to be. You know, and sometimes you can have big, lofty goals about, you know, I would like to do this or be that. But I tell you, I would really urge you to ponder the person you are on a daily basis. I mean, you know, for example, it sounds goofy, man, but I guarantee you there's people that you grew up with, you know, whether it was somebody you braided your hair, somebody you played baseball with, you know, somebody you learned to jump rope with, whatever, but they're somewhere in another school right now wondering whether you remember them. And I know we're different generations, but never underestimate the small random acts of kindness, to just a call or a note to a friend to say, in effect, you know, man, I miss you. You know, these are the kind of things that I think we underestimate. We always think making change in the world has to be something giant, and it really doesn't, man. It can just be a simple, decent act of kindness. So never, ever, ever underestimate what it can mean. You know, I always travel. I know we're different generations, man, but I travel with postcard stamps. And no matter where I travel, I send postcards to friends just to let them know I'm thinking about them. Because somewhere down the road, man, when you're up against it and you're wondering, you know, man, do I have what it takes to keep doing this? When the odds are stacked against you, that's when you're going to need to be able to call those friends up, you know, and ask them for that helping hand and just to remind you what you want to be in life. But anyway, I've prattled on a little bit too long. I hope this has been relatively engaging. But I'm wide open, man. We can talk about anything you want, anything at all. So please, we'll open it up, and I'll go in any direction you want. And again, thanks for the honor, man. I really wish I could I had the time to come back. One of the best drives I ever had was, I came to Kansas City quite a bit in my youth. I did a lot of work there. But driving out over the Flint Hills, I really thought that was one of the best drives I've ever had, and I've always wanted to come back. I enjoyed my time there, but I'm grateful for the gift of technology and the opportunity to spend some time with you now. So I see Oprah there with the mic. That's you.
So what we're going to do now is we're just going to rotate between the classrooms to open it up for a few questions. And
Right.
You might think about this in your role. I don't know if you'd be able to learn from someone who has thought about exercising socially responsible leadership and went out and did it, right? And
I'm sorry, I lost you there for a second. I apologize. You blanked out on me.
Oh, I was talking to the students, so it's okay. Now we're ready for them.
We're good.
Now we're ready for you all. Okay, so, all right, we're going to start in town hall first. Oh, got a question here.
Man, I like people in the back of the room. That's where I always sat in class.
What skill do you think helped you the most as a leader?
What skill? Honestly, I think empathy. I like empathy. I like trying to put myself, there's an old saying, man, you know, never say anything bad till you walk in somebody else's shoes for a mile. That way you're a mile away and you have their shoes. But I like empathy, man. I like the idea of trying to understand where somebody else is coming from, because it can be very easy to judge somebody. If I know I apologize in advance, but you'll see this little heart I have on my finger here. I got that years ago because when I'm tempted to do this now, I'm reminded, dude, don't be a hater. Don't be a hater. You know? So this reminds me a lot, just to, you know, always try and understand where somebody else is living.
All right, Lee's class, do you have a question?
Going.
I'm sorry, say that one more time, please.
When it got hard and you got discouraged. Oh, don't put the camera on. When it got hard and you got discouraged, like if something didn't go the way you planned, what kept you going?
Friendships, man, every time. That's why I talk a lot about friendships. And thank you for your question. I really do. I push that a lot because it can be very easy to lose track of friends or think that somehow your friendship will preserve. I guarantee you, you know, friendships, love, jobs, everything can get stale if you let it. You know, everything can become boring if you let it. And I never wanted my life or my friendships to be boring. So I work hard at my friendships, man. I want to be a good friend because, again, when I'm down and I could call somebody and say, hey, man, can we get together? You know, I'd like to think that I was the kind of friends that people would say, oh yeah, man, come on, let's, you know. But seriously, it's friendships. I can't express that you know, I think you get it. Thanks for your question. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And you deserve more close-ups.
Okay, Nadine.
I'm not hearing anything. Oh, there we go. I think I'm getting it now.
Guys, technology is hard sometimes. It's hard. Any questions in Nadine's classroom, room 123? Her computer. All right, town hall, it's back to you. Here we go.
Hi. Okay. You said that your friendships are very important to you. You also said that you didn't really have any higher background in education. Is that where your business kind of took off with your connections and being a part of like your volunteer community?
Well, you know, the business, I always think it's important to acknowledge, you know, I have been very successful in my career, but you have to understand too, man, and it's no big secret looking at me, man, I'm a white dude in America. You know, there's a million things that came to me that don't come to other people. And you know what we oftentimes underestimate is how powerful confidence is. You know, and as a young white man, there was never anything that ever made me doubt my own ability. And that's a profound thing. So you know, when I started the kitchen, the first donor of food was George Bush Sr. You know, it was their inauguration on January 20th, 1989. I had the confidence to call up the Republican National Committee and say, hey, man, you're going to have these big parties and, you know, you're going to have all this food left over and it would certainly make you all look really good to donate that food. And they said yes, you know, and you got to really get your head around the fact that if I had, you know, if my name wasn't Robert, you know, and I had a different kind of voice, would I have gotten that phone call? Would they have said yes to me? So I always want to emphasize that I try to be more and more aware and continue to be aware about the opportunities I have and why, and then realize that I have a huge obligation to share. One of the reasons I say yes to almost any opportunity to meet with people, talk with people, and I say yes all the time. And if I can say another thing, man, the power of yes. I go out of my way to say yes. But I say yes a lot because, again, I've had advantages that you know, when I opened the DC Central Kitchen, I know it seems like a billion years ago, man, but it was before the internet or cable television. So suddenly, year 2, you know, all of a sudden there's like 24-hour news. And here I am in the nation's capital, right below the capital of the United States. Literally, the DC Central Kitchen was located literally a block and a half from the capital of the United States. So here we were, you know, it was so easy. Every day media wanted to come. And presidents came, you know, the Clintons came, the Obamas came, and that, you know, I'm not as smart. There's 10 million people smarter than I. I would just had the right time, right place. So I just think, I know that's probably a little bit more info than you wanted, but I always want to acknowledge how lucky I am, and I feel really obligated. For example, I'm open source, which means anything I have, I will share. You know, so for example, we just developed a 250-page curriculum for our brand new job training program here. We're offering job training now to 2 different groups. The first, really one of the first intergenerational job training programs ever. It's younger men and women aging out of the foster care system and older men and women coming home from prison. And we developed a very unique curriculum for that. And I'll give it away to anybody who wants it. You know, anybody who wants to come and visit, I'll give them all our recipes. Because I'm not here, I'm here to try and be part of something bigger. And that means being open and being, you know, hyper aware of, I have advantages that other people don't, and I want to share. So I hope that kind of answered your question. And just so you know, man, I'm like regger@lakitchen.org. If you all want to be Facebook friends, man, I'll hook up with anybody. I'm always happy to share, and I'll you know, again, I like leaving a wide trail behind for anybody who wants to follow. So feel free, man. If you want to reach out and send me an email, I'll always respond. Cue the mic for Big Blue there.
Good to go?
There we go.
Hey, cool. Cool. Okay. Hey, first of all, I want to say thank you. Really enjoyed your talk there. Also, I'm an entrepreneur, so I've really connected with your business plan discussion and how you built that business. So I wanted to ask you, how do you manage all that you do? Like, is there a software program you use? Are you a Google Calendar guy? Like, how do you balance all that? Because I've studied other leaders and how they do that, and it really has opened my eyes to valuable tools that they use. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. You know, I tell you, one of the first things I do, I hire really smart people. I surround myself with really smart people. And just so you know, I'm not the highest paid person in my business. I never have been, you know, almost for, I think, probably 15 years. You know, my leadership isn't derived by my paycheck, and my circumstances don't mandate that I'm the highest paid. So I think it's fun sometimes to mess around with my own sense of what does a leader look like, as well as I also want to throw a little sand sometimes into the gears of the larger machine to say, sometimes we think a leader looks like this. You know what I've watched, man? When I was younger, everyone assumed that when we had women and people of color come into leadership, we'd see a really marked difference in style. But oftentimes what I've seen is people, when they become leaders, they just mimic the behaviors of what they think a leader looks like. So they end up acting like white guys. You know, so I'm very interested in constant experimentation with what is leadership. So I always surround myself with really smart people. And I'm always, I don't really have any particular software. I mean, we're on Google, you know, so I do Google Chat, Google Calendar, you know, all that kind of stuff. In fact, I'm really working on a new business right now with Google Chat. I'm fascinated by the technology and how powerful it is and how rarely, I mean, just what we're doing right now is really miraculous. But yeah, man, there's no big tricks to what I do. You know, I mess up all the time. You know, I'm amazed how much I juggle on my own because I do a lot of traveling. You know, again, in a different time I would have been there in person. But like tomorrow, I think I go to Washington State to speak. Next week, I'm in Washington, D.C. I still book my own travel and do all that stuff. But again, you have to understand, man, I've never been a very good administrator. You know, I'm not a great manager. I'm a good leader, you know, and I can set a course, and I have a good sense of what's coming around the bend. Again, it's entrepreneur to entrepreneur. What I'm always interested in is, again, seeing the future, going out to meet it, thinking about business opportunities. I'll give you something I'm really intrigued by right now. You know, as obviously I'm interested in issues of aging. I think it's going to be a profound thing, but it's also many, many interesting business opportunities. Now, my sister-in-law just reached out and let us know that, in fact, she's about 10 years older than my wife and I. And she said, look, man, I'm broke. My money's gone. You know, now luckily she owned her home, but we were able to sell her home, and we just moved her out. My wife and sister-in-law just drove across America. They just landed. Luckily, there's a brand new app here in LA that hooks women. And again, statistically, and this is what I love about entrepreneur stuff, you know, you're using a little bit of probability. You know, you're saying, in effect, if I know that there's going to be this many people getting old in America, what can I predict they will want? I'm looking at food, but another person was saying, you know, more than half the population is women. Women oftentimes outlive their husbands. What could be more terrifying than growing old alone as a woman in America? So she's created an app that allows women to basically hook up and share apartments. And the idea of women living communally, that's a very, very predictable business model. So the idea that she's creating this app that allows women to hook up and say, in effect, look, I have a dog, I love to garden, I can cook, or 1,000 other different things that they can offer so they can create a purposeful community. And I think that is rad. I'm so excited by this kind of stuff. So, but that's a classic example of a powerful use of new software. And make no mistake, dude, the old image of like grandpa trying to turn on the remote with the iPhone, that's changing fast, man. You know, over 50s are roaring onto the internet, basically so they can cyber nag you from a distance now that you've moved away. But anyway, man, a pleasure to chat with you.
Hi. So we're doing a Cats for Can leadership experience in our leadership class. And we're going around to the Manhattan community and collecting cans around Manhattan and taking in donations. How would I make a big impact by doing that?
You know, there was a group I really admire called, what's it called? It's like Feeling Good, I think was the name of this group. Started by a young woman in college, and she wanted to get a dialogue going, right? It wasn't just about the act of collecting cans. She wanted to somehow engage people in dialogue. So she started this thing where she went out on the quad and started making grilled cheese sandwiches for $1, you know? And who doesn't love a grilled cheese sandwich? Probably like one of the top 5 inventions ever made in the history of the world. And, but the point is, it was powerful because she had a line of people, because everybody would stand in line to spend $1 on a grilled cheese. But while she was making the grilled cheese, she could talk to them about the way they were going to use the money. So instead of it just being a random transfer of like, here's $1, here's a grilled cheese, it was a chance to dig a little bit deeper into how was this young woman going to spend the $1 that you were giving her? And the idea sometimes is to draw people in. I often use the term Trojan horse, you know, and a lot of the businesses I build are Trojan horses. They are designed to lure people in, to get them to open the proverbial gates of their brain, you know, of their spirit, of their mind, so that they're open to new ideas. You got to understand, and it's going back to my little heart, you know, people in America are really decent, kind people by far. You know, they give $300 billion a year to charity. Like literally, you know, 75 million people volunteer. It's a really amazing thing. But most people would rather think if you're hungry or poor, it's your fault. You know, man, just get a job. You must be, and they're not bad people whatsoever. They're just afraid. Because sometimes the idea that you know, hungry people are just like you and me is a little bit too abstract and a little bit too close to home. So sometimes people can keep, you know, all kinds of issues, whether it's about gender or race or ethnicity or sexual preference. A lot of times people will hold on to ideas because it keeps them safe. And so it's easy to think somebody might be ignorant or dumb because they think different from you. But again, I go back to that thing of empathy. How do you meet people where they're at and guide them over? So oftentimes, the kind of things we're talking about here, you know, how do you kind of get people to open the door to maybe talk about cats for cans or cans for cats but that idea of, is there a way that you might be able to talk about what you're going to do with the food, why you've chosen the group, what are they doing? You know, in other words, by giving them those cans, you might be saving that agency you're supporting lots of money. And how will they use that money to potentially, you know, keep kids out of prison or teach people to read or get people off drugs? You know what I mean? If you can find a way to get to them, you know, look hard for those secret doorways. Because I think a lot of people want to go through them, man. They're just a little bit afraid. I always say, I'm not in the nonprofit business. I'm in the bravery business. You know, my job is to get people to be brave enough to see themselves in a different light, to look at others in a different light, and to see, you know, the power of community. You know, another thing, I don't know if you have a chance, but, you know, the first experience I had as a volunteer, I served the poor in a traditional way, right? I sat on this side of a table and served somebody on the other side. And when I built the DC Central Kitchen, I wanted everybody to come around the same side. So that in effect, you really started to experiment less with the charitable idea of I fed somebody, so I fought hunger, and really get into more of the idea of community and the power that exists within every community. You know, my bag is everybody has value, everybody has a role, everybody has something to contribute. And I told this story so many times, but it's true, man. I don't know how many times, you know, famous people would come to the DC Central Kitchen, including, again, the whole first family, man. The Obamas, the Clintons would come. And nothing's more powerful than seeing the President of the United States standing next to, you know, a kid in high school having to get service, or an older person who wants to stay active and engaged in their community. And them all looking to somebody who's in the job training program, or maybe their third week there. And they might have been in prison for 20 years. But suddenly, right then, right there, the President of the United States and all these other people are looking to that person for guidance. And there's nothing more powerful than seeing the President of the United States saying to someone who used to be, again, in prison or in homeless or on the streets, saying, you know, am I doing this the right way? You know, and that person to be able to say, well, actually, no, sir, you're not. You do it this way. That's power. You know, and that's what I think you all have the power to do when you go out. I just urge you to don't Don't just go out into a volunteer experience and do what you think you're supposed to do. You know, you're young, you're bright, man, you got clear, beautiful, open eyes. Try and see the experience for what it could be, not what it is. You know, and use what you're learning. Don't think charity has to be about your heart. You know, I always say, man, I use my head and my heart, and I use my head first. You know, I'm not here to do good deeds. I'm here to make change. So I'm constantly trying to find ways, again, that I can do my business better, but also how can I pull more people into this experience so that, like me, they might go out on a volunteer experience reluctantly, but they'll go home thinking, man, you know, maybe if they did this. And that's one of the reasons I would say yes, is because someone told me no, and I will never ever do that to someone else. I will never say your idea isn't any good or we can't do it that way. So again, I apologize for the long-winded answer, but I hope that gets you a little bit further. And stay in the back of the room, man. That's where all the cool people sit.
Okay, so my question doesn't directly pertain to leadership, but you've opened a kitchen in DC as well as in Los Angeles. What's kind of your next step? Do you plan on staying in the US or reaching out to other countries, or kind of what's your plan with that?
Well, you know, I've always been, you know, like I said, in DC, many people came to visit. You know, we were always open to visitors. And so we helped a lot of other people come and explore ways in which they might take the resources in their community. And a lot of what I try and do, most of the models I work on are I try to use things that exist everywhere. You know, no matter where you go, and you know, in most major cities around the world, and as far-fetched as it might sound, because I helped somebody open a kitchen in India, you know, in New Delhi, and I couldn't believe that there was food being thrown away, but there was food being thrown away. Interesting enough, you know, we went looking for it. You know where we found it? The airport. It was all those airplanes coming into New Delhi, and they were loaded with food that they didn't use. But you know what I mean? We looked hard, and we found every city, there's food being thrown away. There's a kitchen that's sitting there empty more than it's open. There's people who want off the street. There's jobs, people who will help teach. All that stuff exists. And that's one of the things that has allowed the models I build to be, you know, kind of replicated. But I'm doing this because I know globally there is no plan for aging. There is really no country. There's a few cities where they're doing really interesting work. You know, Tokyo, Seoul, Hong Kong, all kinds of interesting experiments. But in America, man, there is no plan. So I'm fully anticipating that people are going to come here. But my goal, again, I'm not here to be like, you know, open McKitchens. I just want to help other people figure out if there's a way they can do something like it in their town. But I guarantee it'll be global. Because again, there's kind of a secret formula that I'm after right now, which is how do you feed more people healthier food for less money? Everyone's going to have to figure that out. So what I'm working on, just so you know, is we're obviously going a little bit more plant-based. You know, we found that by buying the fruits and vegetables that farmers couldn't sell, we could get the price of a meal down a lot. And then we could take the profit, if you will, and reinvest that in salaries for our workers. So we could start people at $13 an hour with full benefits. The next stage to get the price even down lower is to start to move away from meat as the center of the plate. And this is a classic way, if I can just jump for a second here, a classic example is sometimes we do things over and over and over again, and we don't stop. And I was thinking about this one day, and I realized, man, you know what? School food, prison food, hospital food, airline food, all institutional food has in common. It's the plastic plate, you know, that says, here's where the big piece of meat goes, and then you have a little piece of vegetables and starch and some dessert. This plastic plate, and I'm like, oh man, let's get rid of the plastic plate. Suddenly, intellectually, we were kind of free, and we could reinvent what does a meal look like. So now we're looking at kind of a bowl or even a bento box, but the idea of still giving people small amounts of meat if they choose, but really starting to tilt a little bit more towards plant-based. Doctors are going to be prescribing as the Affordable Care Act kicks in. More and more doctors are going to be talking to older patients about what they eat. So you can actually predict that doctors will prescribe fruits and vegetables. So, but I think that's what eventually people are going to come and they're going to want our recipes. And I'm happy to give it to them. Yeah, you too. It was a pleasure to chat.
We have one more over here, Tamara and Robert, if that's okay. So
yeah, dude, you can cut in line. It's okay.
Thank you.
love cutting in line. It's my favorite.
There you go.
I appreciate what you're doing, making progress kind of in a area, not treating the symptom, you're treating the cause of the problem. So I wanted to say that. And I wanted to know how you've seen and how you see technology changing hunger.
Oh man, every day I see new apps coming out, that are in effect saying, I have food, can somebody come get it? And I think that's cool. I'm fascinated by the names people come up for these things. Like there's the food cowboy, and I just kind of laugh every time I hear that, but it's a very popular model right now. There's a bunch of groups, get this, there's a group called Ample Harvest, and they're basically asking people who have backyard gardens or fruit trees to donate their surplus product. And anybody who ever grows, like has tomato plants in your backyard, man, there's like 10,000 times more tomatoes than any human could ever eat. So this idea of giving people the option, I'm very interested in isolation. Feeding older people is one thing, but the real hunger, and this is really important, man, there's what I like to call the deeper hunger in America. It's that desire to be needed, for human contact. So I'm very interested in the role technology might play in keeping people hooked up. But I think, again, man, this is why I'm so fascinated by what your generation is bringing, because as I've said before, man, you all are the most technologically advanced generation ever in the history of the planet. And the fact that you all can communicate with each other globally in just a matter of seconds. I mean, just this morning, man, between Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, man, I saw, the blood moon from around the world, man. I just saw so many pictures of the eclipse from last night. But again, what a wonder that is. So that's when you all talk about going out to volunteer, whether it's in Manhattan, back home, or wherever you end up. I urge you to look at technology. In fact, I'm amazed now. There's another thing that fascinates me, again, for aging, but it's the idea of almost like a Fitbit that a senior could wear. But in other words, if somehow they get an irregular heartbeat, or sometimes if they're insulin, or if they need insulin, it alerts a family member. So in other words, I might be at work, but I can know that my mother or father is having difficulty. So these things are really, there's so much power there. Is that something you're interested in? Go for it, man. I tell you, man, our daughter's 25 and she lives in Olympia, Washington. And I tell her, and anybody's young man, I tell her there's gold and old, and I don't mean that in just like go out and profit, but the issue of aging, this has never happened before ever, man. This many people living this long, and there's no plan. And so there's the one level of how do we make sure people have basic human needs met, but this other larger thing, like I said, that deeper hunger, how do you keep people engaged, involved, needed, necessary, man? And that's where I think, your generation has a lot to bring. So bring it on, my brother.
Thank you.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Hi. Okay. So my question is in the beginning of DC Central Kitchen, was there ever a day that you woke up and you were just like, is it even worth it anymore? And what kept you going?
Oh, all the time. I mean, I tell you, in fact, we talk about this now. I'm trying to make the LA Kitchen a profit sharing model. Because I'm eventually going to be hiring a lot of men and women who have spent long years away in prison. And I have to be intellectually engaged and realize no matter if I pay somebody $15, $18 an hour, if they spend 20 years behind bars, they don't have any money in the bank. And the only way they might catch up. See, if I'm going to talk about issues of aging, I can't even inadvertently be part of the problem. And if I just, say, in effect, I'm paying a good wage and not realize that there's no way you can catch up for 20 years. So what we're looking at here is the idea of, can we match a retirement account 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1 based on our profit that year, right? But a lot of that's because of your question. It's the idea of how do you incentivize workers and anybody so they really want to come in on a daily basis. And some of that obviously is financial. A lot of it's mission. But I'll tell you, you wouldn't believe how many times, and I know this sounds goofy, I'm going to say it anyway, but you'd be amazed, man. I couldn't get over it. There'd be days when I just put my head down and be like, oh, man, F this job, And it would be like suddenly, I swear to God, it was like, I don't know what it was, but it was like knock, 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 knock. And I'd look up, and there would be somebody who I hadn't seen in a year or two who had graduated from our job training program saying, hey, man, I just got a new car. Come out and see it. Or, hey, I just got engaged. I'd like you to meet my husband or my future wife. just, that's what I meant. It would be these moments. I swear to God, it was like an angel on earth was being sent to just remind me why I did it. Now, I'm a big believer that there are amazing signals all around you every day if you put out, the right energy. And I know, man, boy, did I just sound like a Californian or what? I can't believe I just said that. But honestly, man, this is why I talk about just being a decent, caring human. You'd be amazed that sometimes it's not easy, man. I mean, it's easy to get cynical, but the last thing I want to be in my life is some crabby old dude, So I work really hard to try and see good in the world. And that comes back at you. I swear, they call it karma, they call it a million things, but just trying to be genuinely, positive in life. But I wake up really excited. I mean, I really try and make myself get up and say, in fact, I refuse to be boring. I refuse to be normal. I refuse to submit to the tyranny of routine. I am going to rock today. I am going to be a badass today. I refuse to be crabby. I'm going to be nice. I'm going to see the positive in people. I'm going to do small acts all day long. I am going to rock life, and I'm never going to stop. And that's, again, it's not every day as in polka dots and moonbeams, as I said, but I honestly believe that if you go out there with a pretty positive attitude, life will send some cool shit right back at you.
Okay, do you want one more? All right, we have one final question. A very eager final question. Go for it.
Hey, Robert, I was going to ask you, what was the hardest part of getting the LA food court set up, getting all the government official money from the corporations and giving back to the farmers and everybody else?
Oh man, I got to. This has been the hardest 2 years of my life, man. I didn't think it was going to be this hard. I mean, I came out here at age 55, and I wanted to do something real new. My wife and I had been married 30 years, and the kitchen had been roaring for 25 years. It was time for me to move. It was a good move for us. I chose LA because, again, you have access to an unlimited supply of food. You have, sadly, the largest concentration of older people living in poverty in America. And you have media here, which is a great way to transmit big ideas. So for every reason, LA was the place to come. And there's an old saying, man, LA is a city where the future comes to happen. So I wanted to be part of that. But brother, man, was it hard. I can't believe, because I was all the chips in, man. There was no going back to DC. There was no going back. And I was all in. And this is sometimes, and it's a good way to close, because sometimes, man, you got to put all the chips on the table. If you believe in something, and if you believe in yourself, there's these moments. And if you really want to be part of something bigger, it's the big risk, the big gamble. It isn't for the weak. But I'll tell you, man, it was worth it. But I had many real sleepless nights. This isn't going to work. I'm out so far because I couldn't get people interested. I got to be honest, man. I overestimated. I thought people would really dig and understand what I wanted to do about aging in America. And one of the reasons I came to Los Angeles is because it's a temple of youth, man. What better place to go and disrupt the order of the way we view our elders in America, and to challenge this idea of aging and what is beauty and what is a life well lived and what is success than, the belly of the beast that is Hollywood, California. The perfect spot to say, again, man, wrinkles are the new tattoos. You are beautiful. You are needed. You don't have to change your physical appearance to be beautiful. I really thought that I would come out here with my record for accomplishment, and frankly, dudes, just some straight out demographics. As I suggested, the largest concentration of older people, the number is going to double in 10 years. The savings patterns of boomers, which is not very much money in the bank. And I thought that people would say, wow, dude, I'm so glad you're here. Let's get to work. I really thought that people would be excited. But what I've discovered is, and this is really important to get your head around because we're talking about good deeds. Man, most people would say, oh, I'd rather feed children. Children are important. Old people, it doesn't really matter. And I was really kind of shocked by how often I heard that. We're such a throwaway society that we throw away people. So I had to regroup. And this is another important thing. Sometimes if people aren't buying your product, don't blame the customer. Look at the product. So I still and really adamant about the need to advocate on behalf of aging. And I know that's where the future is going to take me. But I just readjusted my business plan and focused a little bit more on food and making sure that food wasn't thrown away and farmers were supported and that young men and women stayed out of prison. And that eventually attracted the kind of funding I needed. We just got our last big grant to pay for the construction of the 20,000 square foot kitchen I built. What's exciting about it too, if you come to visit, we're now in the biggest food incubator space in America. I co-located with these two guys I partnered up with, but there's 54 kitchens in a 60,000 square foot warehouse. And we're the anchor tenant with 20,000 square feet. But, we have built what I think is one of the most badass kitchens anybody's ever seen. And it was worth it all. Like I said, those many nights of real abject terror, but it paid off. So sometimes, young brothers and sisters, it's worth taking a risk. And even if you fail, man, there's an old saying by a great writer, Hunter S. Thompson, man, I'd rather be shot out of a cannon than squeezed out of a tube. Sometimes it's more important to go out there and fail gloriously than to live a boring life. So don't ever be afraid of risk. Always be confident in your own abilities. Go forth, young friends, and take over the world. Have fun. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Robert, and good luck to everyone who has a test. Don't forget you need to submit your reflection within 24 hours via OrgSync. Hey, Robert, you mentioned mac and cheese. We have in our food truck in Manhattan a grilled mac and cheese sandwich. I'm sorry, you said grilled cheese. You have to try a grilled mac and cheese sandwich next time you're in the Little Apple.
Well, let's make that happen. I have to get back out there ASAP.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
everybody.
Have a good night.